Sony ZVE1 versus the Sony A7S III. It's gonna be kind of a sad video because I think that this camera is gonna be the last one that we'll see in the A7S series. If you haven't seen my video on the ZVE1, I highly recommend you to head over there and watch that before we watch this video, because if you want to see a review of this camera, then that video basically covers everything that you need to know about how good this camera is. For someone that has been using the A7S III for a little bit more than 2.5 years, I think it's incredibly fun to see a camera like this pop off in the market right now, because not only is Sony bringing sort of like the best features of the A7S III together with the best features from the A7R5 into one single camera body that makes it way easier to start using a camera than what it is with the A7S III, for example. And if you haven't seen my channel before, my name is Peter, hope everything is good, and I just realized that I haven't put my glasses on. I'm just gonna put that on. Oh, here we go. If you enjoy this video, then you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button. So let's start off with the biggest difference, which is of course the body. It's a little bit smaller. It's a little bit more like the A7SIII combined with the ZVE1. So it definitely doesn't look like the Alpha 7 lineup cameras. And the biggest difference between the two, in my opinion, is going to be the grip, because the grip on the ZVE1 is bad. Like, it's not good at all. But to be able to keep the camera small, I totally get why they did it. But when it comes to being more ergonomic and to have a grip that actually is comfortable to hold, the A7 III has it, hands down. You'll also notice that we don't have a viewfinder on the ZVE1, and that is something that I have on the A7S III. However though, I have not ever used the viewfinder on the S3 when I'm making videos. I don't miss that at all. I think that for someone that is making video first, having a viewfinder doesn't really matter. But if you're looking into using your camera as both a photo and video camera, and you're looking to have the best video specs on the market, then the A7S III is probably going to be the better choice between the two. But if you're just making videos, I don't see the reason as to why you need to have the viewfinder. It's just one of those things that is cool to have. You can use it just because you have it. Up top, we have the custom mode wheel on the S3. That is something you don't have on ZVE1. I do like the fact that you can switch between the different modes like photo, video, and S&Q very quickly though. And I think that the reason that I feel comfortable with this is because I had basically the same thing set up with my mode wheel. So on the custom mode 1, I had it set to 25 FPS and then 50 FPS on the 2, and then photo mode on number 3. So it's basically the same thing here. The only difference is that it's just a switch that goes back and forth. You don't have anything else. But then again, this is the only thing that I'm using the mode wheel for. I mean, like the auto function of the mode wheel is something that I never use. Maybe I go to manual, and when I choose film, I usually use one of my custom modes instead of switching it over to film. You do have a couple more buttons on the A7S III though, which I like, because having customizable buttons is something that is gonna help you to streamline your entire workflow. And looking up top here, you can see that you have the wheel here in the back. That is also something that we have on the ZVE1. But in the front, you have a second wheel on the A7S III, and that is something that you don't have on the ZVE1. I do like this wheel because I had it set to my aperture, so my fingers are kind of used to using the shutter, aperture, and ISO. So thumb is like shutter and ISO, and then the index finger is the aperture. I think that this is great to have, and I do miss that feature on the ZVE1, but instead of having it in the front, they have put it on the wheel in the back. The downside with that though is that when I was using the wheel on the A7S III, I had it set so that when I just turned it, it was changing up the ISO instead of having to push it and then turn it. Now I gotta get used to having the aperture on the wheel and then pushing the ISO button and then turn it to adjust the ISO. It's a minor difference, but it's something that, you know, when you have a lot of muscle memory, it gets into you, and then you gotta rewire your brain to get it to work. On the back of the camera, as you can see, the A7S III has way more buttons that you can customize and that you can use, which is great, because customizable buttons is something that I'm a huge fan of, because it can turn this into a freaking machine when it comes to making videos. The way that I've set up my A7S III makes everything very quick. Like everything, I know this inside and out. Looking at two side by side, you can see that the ZVE1 doesn't have the C3 button, it doesn't have the Z1 button, it doesn't have the AEL, and you don't have the AF on, and you also don't have the joystick in the back. Whenever I was shooting videos and I wanted to center the focus, I just pressed down the joystick and then held it, so that I always had like a center focus. It's great when you're doing reframing of shots and you want to maintain the focus point of something specific over there, but move it to sort of like the rule of thirds. So a little bit less customization that is going to be available on the ZVE1 compared to the A7S III. But you do also have the function menu more easily accessible in the touch interface of the camera, which makes it easier to use. And you have these sort of like quick buttons in the menu that you can use as well, which gives you sort of like an extra customizable button, I guess. Looking at the ports of the camera, you can see that the A7S III has a full-size HDMI. That is something that you don't have on the ZVE1. We have a micro HDMI, I think it is. But other than that, you have the same kind of ports going in and out, unless you want to have the micro USB that you got on the A7S III. I mean, like, is that really something that you're gonna miss? No, I don't think so. When it comes to the card slots, that is something where the A7S III kind of trumps the ZVE1. Not only do you have 2 card slots in the A7S III, but you also have dual functions of them. So you can use the CF Express and the regular SD card type. In the ZVE1, you can only use the regular SD cards. I usually only use one port when I'm recording, but I have a lot of CF Express cards that I want to use on this camera as well, but now I can't. So that's a bit of a downer. And it also means that you can't record 4K 120 all intra with the ZVE1 either. That is something that you can do on the A7S III. Another reason that I like having 2 card slots is because then you always know that you have 2 SD cards with you. So if one gets full, then you just pop it out and then pop it in the second slot, do that good old switcheroo, so you can get an empty card again. Weight of the camera is 480 grams. And if I add in one of these plates that I usually have on my camera, we're up to 509 grams. The A7S III comes in at 682 plus one of these plates, 711. That means that this camera is almost 200 grams lighter than the A7S III. I love that. When it comes to the performance of these cameras, they are basically the same. Like, you're gonna get the same kind of image quality, you're gonna get a little bit better autofocus with the ZVE1, you're gonna get a couple of more functions with the ZVE1, and you're also gonna have the possibility to import your own LUTs and have sort of like the CinemaLine menu that you got on the FX3 in the ZVE1 as well. The A7S III doesn't have those kind of functions, which is something that I missed. Like, being able to have the possibility to import your own LUTs into the camera is something that I've wished for a long time with this camera, but there hasn't been any sort of updates. Having the option to have your own LUTs is something that's great, because then you know that the exposure is going to look correct when you're looking at the display. It's not going to look any different from when you jump into post or shooting the actual video. I love having that option in the camera. When it comes to the touchscreen of the ZVE1, it is heaps and miles better than the A7S III. Not only the responsiveness of the touchscreen, but also the actual menu system and the way that you can like swipe up the function menu, swipe in the quick vlog setting menu. And something that baffled me quite a lot is that when you look at the cameras from up top, you can see that the A7S III is the thicker camera. The ZVE1 is a little bit smaller, or thinner, I think is the correct word. But when I tried, I did not have any sort of overheating issues with the ZVE1. I was able to record 4K 25 for 1 hour non-stop without any sort of overheating issues. And then instantly, like straight after I stopped the recording, I switched over to 4K 50 and started recording, and that worked for 24 minutes without any sort of issues either. So it was like 1.5 hours of constant recording, no overheating issues. So having a smaller camera capable of the same kind of output as the A7S III is actually kind of cool. There's also a tether light on the ZVE1, something that you don't have on the A7S III, and this is good when you're recording. For example, right now I'm recording my FX6, I can see that the red light is glowing and is actually showing me that it's recording. And the same thing is going to happen when you start recording off this camera, because then you know that it's actually recording. It's been too many times where I've just like, ugh. When you're doing a lot of run and gun shooting, you want to have that in your camera to know that you've actually pressed the record button. When it comes to the internal microphone of the ZVE1, I think it's good. This is the microphone test of the Sony A7S III together with ZVE1, and this is what it sounds like on the A7S III with the internal microphone. We all know that it doesn't sound as good as one would like, but this is what it sounds like on the ZVE1. And it's still not going to be close enough to having a real professional shotgun microphone, but I do think that it's going to be a way better option than the internal microphone of the A7S III. And you do have some crisp audio when there's not too much noise around, and when you're out and about getting the shot, then this might just be enough, you know? But then again, it's an internal microphone, and it's not going to be meant to outperform a shotgun microphone or anything like that. It's just going to give you a better option if you don't have a better microphone to use at the time. So for me, that has been using the A7S III for a little bit more than 2.5 years, and the ZVE1 for approximately 4 weeks at this point. I do think that the ZVE1 is a very interesting camera. I like it a whole lot. But if you already own the A7S III, it is by no means gonna make your camera bad just because this is released. This camera is great, and if I were to buy a new camera today, I would probably look at this camera instead of the A7S III, but the A7S III is still gonna have the same kind of features almost as the ZVE1, and it's still gonna perform just as good. Like the sensor didn't become bad just because there's a new camera using the same sensor released. But as I said in the beginning of this video, with the release of this camera, I think that the A7S III is going to be the last one that we see in the S lineup, because the only thing that I feel that I need in another A7S series camera would probably be to have internal NDs. But internal NDs is a cinema line feature, and that's where you have the cinema line and the FX3. So I'm thinking that it's going to be more likely to see an FX3 Mark II rather than an A7S IV. So to conclude this video, I think that the A7S III still has a place for those of you that need to have the redundancy of 2 memory card slots, or using the viewfinder when you're out in bright daylight, or whatever it might be. But if you're looking to buy your first camera, I don't see why you would buy a 2.5-year-old camera as compared to a just released camera that has same specs but even better processing power and better features built into the camera. I would love to know your thoughts. This is going to be a very interesting thing. And what do you think? Is this going to be the death of the A7S III? Drop a comment, because I think it is. Just putting it out there. Thanks so much for watching. Peter from Sweden is saying goodbye, and hope that the audio was crisp, because I'm using a new setup. Thank you.